So welcome. So glad to see you all here. My name is Mary Ann Comfort. I'm part of the Mercy Justice team and really glad to welcome you to the third in our series of Advocacy Amplified to give you tips of ways of being an effective advocate in all different kinds of forms and formats. And tonight we're going to be looking at in-person meetings, which in our current reality can also mean Zoom or Teams or others. But one way that you're actually having a conversation with a member of Congress or their staff person, whether it's actually in person or via this kind of technology that we have, it's so wonderful. So what we're going to do this evening is we're going to open with prayer as we usually do, and then Sister Rosemary is going to give us a little brief introduction to our topic. And then we have a staff member from a member of Congress who's going to speak to us of what that looks like being the one in conversation. And then we will share some resources with you, and happy then to have some conversation and questions back and forth. So let us begin with prayer, Lamar.
Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, as unique as we all are, so are our stories. Each story is intricately woven with the details of life, enriched with memories, some pleasant and some not so pleasant. In every detail, every memory, every element of our story, you are present. As we share our faith, we witness to your ever-present, ever-faithful, ever-loving accompaniment on our journey. Living God, may we share our faith stories in ways that might bring people closer to you and your love for justice. Guide us to those you want us to share our stories with so that justice may be brought about. Thank you for those you have sent to share their stories with us. Together, all our stories are part of your story, for which we pray and thank you. Amen.
Thank you so much, Lamar, for grounding us in prayer. And now we will turn to Sister Rosemary, who's going to get us right into our topic.
Well, the question would be, why do we do lobbying? Why should we encourage people to lobby? Meeting your member of Congress or his or her staff, whether in person or by Zoom, is really the most effective way to build a relationship and influence policy. Whether you go to Washington, D.C., or you go to your elected official's district office, or you have an in-person or Zoom meeting, that provides you with an opportunity to express the human side of policy issues, particularly for vulnerable people, and to foster a working relationship. We often overlook that in the many rights protected by the First Amendment is the right to lobby. The Constitution doesn't use the term lobby, but they say the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances, and is specifically noted. So that is a right to lobby in the U.S. Constitution. The number of registered professional lobbyists in D.C. is over 12,000. Most of those lobbyists represent corporations such as drug companies or professional groups such as labor unions or teachers, and they're often full-time. So we might say, what does our lobbying do when we spend 15 minutes, 30 minutes, or whatever, maybe a couple of times a year or less often or more often? But what are we uniquely bringing to lobbying, in our lobbying to our elected officials? We're generally lobbying on behalf of those vulnerable people who could be most hurt or most helped by provisions in certain bills before Congress. Or we may be lobbying about the protection of the environment or other social justice issues that are particularly related to the critical concerns. I'll give you some examples from my personal experience. In 2 weeks, I'll be lobbying with Catholic Relief Services to take provisions out of the Farm Bill, which would compromise humanitarian foreign aid. I've lobbied in the past for the inclusion of immigrant women in the Violence Against Women Act, and for voting rights, and for many other issues, immigration or environment. And sometimes, often in our lobbying, we want to bring the stories of those who have been injured or treated unfairly, or who have unmet needs. Those are examples of our bringing to our elected officials a voice and a perspective that might not be heard otherwise. We bring our passion for justice and our compassion to our elected officials in our willingness to take this extra step to bring the voices of those who are most left out. So I'd like to, at this point then, introduce our speaker tonight, who works for Representative Congressman Patrick McHenry. Brett Keeter serves as the district director for the United States Congressman Patrick McHenry, who is the chairman of the House Committee on Financial Services. In his official capacity, he serves as the chief district staff member, overseeing the congressman's offices and managing outreach, constitutional constituent case work, and community and constituent relationships, particularly in the 8 counties of North Carolina's 10th district. He also serves as a primary liaison to city, county, and state officials, to agencies, Chamber of Congress, community boards, and task forces for the congressman. This sounds really like a more than full-time job. Brett is a 1999 cum laude graduate of UNC Charlotte with a BA in political science and a minor in history. Among his many other honors and involvements, he was appointed in 2017 to the UNC Charlotte Board of Trustees and the UNC Board of Governors. Currently serving his second term, and he chairs the board's Academic and Student Life Committee. Among other honors, he was the 2016 recipient of the William Gaston Award, which is the highest recognition given by the Gaston County Commissioners for dedication in community service. Brett lives in Gastonia with his wife, Melanie, and he enjoys running, hiking, and reading anything about history. So, Brett, we leave the floor to you.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here with you tonight, and as I was saying before everyone joined, that I'm a native of Gaston County, North Carolina, just outside of Charlotte, and that is the Sisters of Mercy are have been here for well over 100 years, and they have an indelible mark in this community with their charitable works, and just with Holy Angels. For those of you familiar with that institution, it's if you don't know about it, look into it. It will. As I said earlier, it will heighten your spirits just to learn about it. But you asked me to talk about a bit about advocacy, lobbying. It gets a bad name in the American vernacular these days, but it is something that is very important because it's your right to speak to your elected officials. It's and a good lobbyist, a good advocate, it is there as a two-way street. It's somebody that elected officials can look to say, these are people who are experts in a given field, or somebody who's passionate about a given cause. And if you build a bit of trust with elected officials, they know that you are a person that they can trust on certain issues, and they begin to seek you out when those issues come before them in legislation, or when something's welling up and they want to know, okay, maybe we can do something on these issues, and they bring you in as a stakeholder. I've seen that happen many times. So it's not a bad thing. There are some bad actors out there who give it a bad name, but it doesn't have to be. So you asked me a few things about what makes a good visit, what doesn't make such a good visit. The first thing, I would address is, is it better to visit in DC or in the members district? And there's advantages and disadvantages to both. In DC, some of the advantages are you can line up a lot of visits at once. You can see a lot of senators, you can see a lot of House members. At one time, a lot of groups do this. They'll tick off, several visits and line up. They'll take groups up and meet with 10 House members and a couple senators, to try to advance their agenda. You can do that up there. You also have access to the policy staff. That's, all the members generally have their legislative staff there. So you can really sit down and have some FaceTime with the legislative experts that help those members craft legislation, research legislation. Those folks are all in DC. The downside is you're going to be on a very tight schedule. Meetings in DC are if you get 30 minutes, you are doing really well in Washington. That's a long time. Most of the time they're 15 minutes, 20 minutes, at most. And then the schedule there is crazy. And speaking of that, your meeting can be canceled like that because votes can be shifted around. Your meeting may be shifted. You're likely to not meet with the member. You're likely to just meet with staff. So things can be very fluid in DC. In the members district, however, some of the advantages there are it's different. You will have much longer. I don't say much longer, but when I'm scheduling things out for my boss in our district, we generally do it in hour blocks. We'll take him to a place to visit, like Holy Angels, or Catherine's house. That's like an hour visit, and they show him around. He'll get a tour, he'll get a briefing. So you get more time with them, even if it's a visit in his district office to just discuss something. 30 minutes minimum. So you get a little more time. It's a little more relaxed. And you're meeting with the member. There's not really much of a chance that's going to change. Like I said, you're there in the district with them. So it's a little more laid back. Downsides to a district meeting are you're probably going to have to wait longer for it to happen. District time is at a premium. They're usually in DC, so those district work weeks. We generally have a list of things that are waiting to line up in the district. So it's just you have to wait until you get your turn. The other thing is you need to be flexible as far as lining those up. If you're asking for a specific date and you say I'd like him to come on this day and this time, you're probably not going to get that. So you need to be very flexible if you're looking to get a meeting in the members district. As far as what makes a good visit, a couple of things. I would say one thing you can do, send your talk. You're going to work through the member scheduler generally. That's who you're going to set something up with. Schedulers go by a couple different titles. Some call it director of operations. But they do the same job, and they do a very difficult job. It is a job I would never have, because corralling some members of Congress and their it's controlling their lives, and their lives are hacked. But I would send your talking points and as much detail of what you're wanting to discuss in advance. Nobody wants to walk into a meeting blind and not know exactly what you're going to want to discuss. This is going to help the member have an idea of getting in the right headspace of, okay, what do I need to be prepared for? But also, they're generally going to be staffed by a staffer. Knowing which staffer to assign to the meeting is going to depend on knowing which issues you generally want to discuss. If you're going to want to discuss, environmental issues, that may be a different staffer than if you're going to want to discuss immigration. If you're going to want to discuss both and a couple things, then it may be a couple people, or it may be just hashing out who's best, but they want to know this information. And to that point, don't bring a laundry list of things. You may be concerned with 12 things at once, but you're not going to have time to go into depth on everything. So pick 3 things, 4 things at most that you're really going to want to focus on, because you're not going to have all the time in the world. So pick your top 3, 4 at most things that you really want to drive home, and make that what the topic of your meeting is. Understand that the staff and even the member, may not be able to give you an answer on where a piece of legislation is at the moment, where it's headed, even where they stand at that time. Legislation goes through a lot of gymnastics before it gets to the end, and so a member may be able to tell you that, in its present form, I'm okay with it, but by the time it gets out of committee, they may not be able to support it, depending on what amendments get attached to it. So they may be very fuzzy with you or very non-committal about things. The important thing is you're letting them know what you feel about it. You're letting them know what your constituency, and the people that you're concerned about, how it's going to affect them. And the real thing here that is very important, one thing I would very much emphasize to you: show them how it impacts their constituents. If you have concrete examples of things where their constituents are impacted, that's very important. That's going to get their attention like nothing else. You can give them facts and figures about how it impacts people in general, but when you show them how the people that they represent are impacted, that's a really big thing. And be informed. One thing I would just note, I know you're spread out across the country. In North Carolina, we have had a never ceasing series of lawsuits over our voting districts. And so for the last 6 years, the last 4 election cycles, we have represented different congressional districts. So our lines keep changing. So when I say to show how something impacts their constituents, make sure you know where their constituents are, because it looks bad on a person coming in to say, well, your constituents in here, when they don't represent that area. And so know exactly where this person represents when you go in. And the last thing I would say as far as a good visit is try to be a resource. Show ways that you can be a resource to them. And I'll give you an example of that. As I was saying at the beginning, there's a couple of groups that do a really good job at being regular advocates. The Alzheimer's Association is very good. They ask for a meeting every year. Juvenile diabetes, JDRF, they're another one. Every year, like clockwork, they ask for a meeting and give a very succinct update of what legislation they're concerned with. Turns out my boss has a family member who, it looked like they may have had some issue related to something like that. And he had some questions, and he said, you know what? I remember from a meeting with the JDRF advocates that this lady mentioned something about this. Can you find out, can you get her information and so I can reach out to her? And he did. And she was thrilled to be able to share and assist him with information about this. And so that's being a good advocate, is being there at that two-way street for information. So what is a bad visit? You asked for some things. You said what is not useful but often done. Bringing too many people. You want to meet with people you want, but if you've got 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and you come cruising in there with 10 or 15 people, and I've seen it done, it's too many voices in the room, and you're not going to be able to get your message across if too many people are trying to speak or trying to say too many things. This should go without saying, and you're a religious organization. Actually, sometimes that goes out the window. You've probably heard plenty of religious people say rude things, but being rude, aggressive, or argumentative, don't do it. It's human nature. Nobody likes to be insulted. But plenty of people will go in, and if a member doesn't agree with them, they will be rude, and that's not a way to make your argument. There's a way to say that, here's how we feel. We understand you're on a different side of this, but here's some information you may want to consider, without being cross with them. Having unrealistic expectations, and this, where I would go with this is, a lot of people want members to sign on to legislation. And understand that members generally sign on to legislation that they're either ideologically aligned with, or that it has something to do with their committee work. A lot of people come in and they talk to my boss about something that he may be generally in agreement with, but it's healthcare legislation, it's foreign policy legislation, such. My boss is chairman of the Financial Services Committee. He tends to focus on very boring monetary policy type stuff that's wonky, and and he may be in agreement with this, but here's the deal. He believes firmly, if he's going to put his name on something, he wants to be able to have control over it through the committee process and whatnot, so that if some joker starts adding weird amendments to it, that his name's not on it as it comes out looking completely different than it started. So have expectations that that member may not be opposing you just because they don't want to put their name on something. And the last thing I would say is respect the member's time. A lot of times when you sit down with the member, they're not going to be the one to sit there and say, like, okay, I'm running short and I need to go. A, because they don't want to look rude. B, if you're like my boss, he is horrible with time. He would sit there and talk to you for 2 hours. And it's the staff's job to keep them on time. And so if you are respectful of the amount of time you've been given, then later in the day, when he's wondering, well, why am I so behind? And he's looking at the staff, it's like, well, it's because you kept talking and talking. Then it will make everybody happier. So, a lot of times members will will not be cognizant of the time, but if you're respectful of the time that you're given, then in the end they'll often remember that, and it'll just make everybody happier. So that's all I've got. I don't know if that's tremendously helpful to you, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Brett. Yeah, that was very, very informative. I learned a few things myself, and I do lobbying a fair amount. So thank you. I think what we'll do is we'll let Mike share some resources with folks, and then we'll come back to questions to you, Brett, if that's okay. So Mike.
Good evening, everybody. We wanted to pass along to you, and we'll share in the follow-up email kind of a one-page resource for looking at how to set up a meeting and what to think about when you're planning a meeting. And we have some slides that'll be coming up here to show you some of that information as well. Of course, when the slides came up, I lost my notes. So hold on just a second here. So when you want to set up a meeting, like Brett mentioned, you want to contact the office, the district or the local office, or the office in DC with the legislator that you want to meet with. Identify yourself as a constituent and find out how to schedule a meeting. The office may set up the meeting for you, or you may be directed to send an email or to complete an online form. Following those instructions, will get you in the door. And if you don't receive any information in a week, it's probably good to follow up and see where your request is. And as Marianne mentioned, some of these meetings could happen by Zoom if that's more to the advantage of your group and getting together at a time that is available to the legislator or to their staff. Next slide, please. When you're planning the meeting, you're going to want to look at what are the roles that people in your group want to play, assuming that you have a group that's going and you're not going by yourself. You want to look at who's going to be a facilitator, who's going to be a speaker, and who could take notes for you. So the facilitator will manage the flow of the meeting, keep track of the time, move on from one speaker to the next. You may have one or more speakers who are going to present to the legislator or their staff, whoever's present for your meeting. And then your note taker can record key responses from the legislator and their staff. Go ahead and move on to the next slide. So for your meeting agenda, the facilitator is going to help initiate introductions so people know each other's names and who they are. Your speakers have several tasks. They're going to make an ask, and the ask is what you want your legislator to do. You want this to be clear and concise, and as Brett mentioned, you don't want 12 asks. He's mentioned 3 or 4. Sometimes we'll even, push to say just 1 or 2 to really focus on what your message is going to be. You want to share some information that you have around that issue. Why is it important to you? Why is the group that you're with pushing for a particular stand on some legislation? And then it can be really effective to tell stories. What is your personal connection to the issue? Or what are the constituents in the district? What is their personal connection to that issue? How does it affect them? Can be a way to really keep that in somebody's mind when they hear a story about that. And then you also want to ask some questions. And asking questions can help you identify and understand a legislator's position on an issue. They may not have developed one yet, or they may have a very strong stand, but asking them questions about it will give you a sense of where they are at the moment. And then in closing, the facilitator will want to reiterate the ask, distribute any leave behind materials that you have developed or that you have brought with you to further explain the issue and your stand on it. You definitely want to thank the staff and the legislator for their time, because it is an important that they're giving you this time to talk about what's important to you. And then commit to follow up on any questions that the staff or the legislator has had about the issue that you couldn't answer in the moment. So you don't have to be experts on every detail about whatever it is that you're lobbying on, but commit to being willing to follow up with any questions that they have to make the stand that you have more clear. The follow-up then also gives you the opportunity to be in contact again. So we'll move on to the final slide here. So one of your members will want to volunteer to send a follow-up email, reiterate your thanks for the time to meet, send any follow-up material that you promised to share, and then follow up on any of those unresolved questions that came up in your meeting. It's really a really basic outline. We also have some links here to some other resources. We'll have a recording and the recordings from our previous sessions on our website when that is live in a few days. We'll also have some of the print resources that we have made available through our Advocacy Amplified trainings. We also are sharing a link to one of our partner organizations, the Friends Committee on National Legislation. They have a resource page that goes into a little more depth on some specifics about lobby visits. So we're going to share that link with you as well. So hopefully these will be useful, and we'll have this outline out to you in the follow-up email that'll come out before the end of the week.
Super. Thank you, Mike. Very helpful. Have all those resources for folks as well. So just want to open up the lines here if anybody has a question for Brett. Or for us on the justice team, I should say too. But we have Brett here. Let's make use of that. Rosemarie.
Well, this is maybe not so much of a question, it's just to say to Brett that I've been to several of McHenry's town hall meetings, and I know every legislature doesn't do those, but he is great at doing town hall meetings, gives honest answers and keeps control of the crowd, having been to a Sue Myrick one where she let people boo other people. So I really do appreciate how he handles himself. And you mentioned his that he's on the one of the finance committees, and I actually did lobby with him on an SEC issue with one of the sisters who is more financially astute than I am. And it was he was very, we talked to his staff member, but I felt like he was open to looking at it. So that was all good.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah. Unfortunately, town hall meetings have, we did those every year in every county of our district up until COVID, when, we had to shut those down for a year, and honestly, we didn't bring them back after COVID because they had gotten so confrontational, and it's just the nature of public discourse and politics these days, that they were not a useful forum for people wanting to have a honest dialogue with their congressman. They just weren't anymore. It was, I don't recommend to new members that they do them. There's ways you can do sort of a town hall meeting, but just the way that we always did them, of any comers can come in and anybody can line up and ask your questions. It's just it just got to be so hostile. It's sad that it got to be that way, but we had to put so much time and effort into security for these things, which is another sad statement of where we are. But yeah, I do appreciate that. He always handled it with such grace and ability to let things just roll off his back. And you see a lot of members today that are into this confrontation and stuff, and it's part of the problem. But anyway.
Thank you for that. Anyone else have any questions for Brett?
Mike.
Brett, you mentioned that it could take a while to get a meeting in the district with the member. If time is of the essence, do you find can it be effective to meet with staff in the local district to talk about an issue?
Yeah, that's certainly an option. these forums, with Zoom and Teams and things like that, you can also get a virtual meeting with a lot of times the member or the DC legislative staff a lot easier than, that didn't used to be an option. So, we do a lot of virtual meetings with the congressmen and different groups that, need something quicker these days. So those are options as well. But you can always set something up on a fairly quick basis with the district staff, with somebody like myself. The one thing that I would give you as something to keep in mind is keep in mind the difference between a district staff and a DC staff in general. Each member has wide latitude into how they craft their staff. In general, DC staff are more legislative in nature. They are the people, the legislative assistants, legislative director, folks like that, whose job is to work with the member in their role as a lawmaker. So when you're wanting to talk about legislation or things before Congress, they're the experts on that thing. Me and my staff here in the district, we're focused on constituent services. People who aren't getting their veterans benefits, including helping people, improve their veterans disability grade, their Social Security disability, getting passports turned around, working with local elected officials who are running into roadblocks or applying for grants and things like that. If you're talking to me about the intricacies of a bill before Congress, I'm going to have some bit of knowledge, but I'm going to be consulting with my DC counterparts to get you really the meat and potatoes on that kind of thing. So, we work in tandem together, but we have distinctly different roles.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, that's super informative. Thank you. Brett, I'm going to throw a question in. I was really taken with what you said about, sticking with issues that the member of Congress cares about because he or she is sitting on a particular committee. So what do you do if you're really passionate about an issue and your member of Congress isn't on the committee that oversees it? Then that seems like it's kind of a challenge then to get your message in if it's not going to be fruitful to talk, because you're not going to be able to go to talk to people on the committee if they're not your elected representative.
Well, maybe I didn't portray that well. Every member is responsible for ultimately voting on everything. What I was more saying was to have realistic expectations on what a member might be willing to sign on to as far as sponsoring something. A lot of people are really big on wanting a member to sponsor a piece of legislation or whatnot. A lot of groups place I think an outsized emphasis on sponsorship of legislation. And that's where you find a lot of members are uneasy about doing that if it's outside of their main point of emphasis. And some members, that's not their guiding compass, is just their committee work. Some, it's other things. Some it has a lot to do with their district. Now I'll say this, Congressman McHenry, it's not just his financial services work. You will see him sponsor a lot of things that have to do with textile-based trade and whatnot, because that is very impactful to his district. So, it's guided by a lot of things. But no, I would never mean to imply that you don't express what's important to you and your group, to your member, because they need to hear that. And like I say, something important is, try to show them how it impacts their constituents. Show them, that real world of the folks that elect them, that they represent, that are, impacted for the better or for the worse.
Yeah, that's a real helpful distinction. Thank you. That,
Yeah.
that expectations about sponsorship, because I know that is
Yeah.
something that we all are often asking for, and it's good to get the inside view on that. That isn't, why that isn't something that someone might feel comfortable doing. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Sponsorship, or the other thing that a lot of them will ask is, a lot of times there's letters that members will write, where it's a letter to a regulator, or to a letter to congressional leadership urging something that they'll want them to sign on to. My boss is generally very hesitant to sign on to many of those things at all, because he's a committee chair. And so they all have their own reasons for these things. So
Great, thank you. That's really helpful. Anybody else have a question before we bring this to a close? It's been really interesting, really good conversation. Any last question for Brett? All right, I'll say thank you very much, Brett, for your time. Really appreciate you being with us this evening. Really helpful, and really got us a lot to think about, for sure, about how this goes. I want to thank all of you who turned out for our Advocacy Amplified, the last in our series. And again, we'll be sending you a follow-up email, and all the people who registered and didn't make it tonight, so they can also have the resources and view the recording if they'd like to. And we will be in touch with future opportunities for learning as well. So thanks so much, and everyone have a good evening.